All right, class. First off, as always, good day. I'm glad you're here. So, this is a new section, and it's called Growing Division and Reform. There is no better word than division that basically explains what's going to be happening in this lesson and this unit, because we're going to be talking about slavery and how it separates our country. Is a state going to be free or a slave? Should we get rid of slavery? Should we keep it? That type of discussion issue just tears our country in two. Okay. So the objective today, we're going to analyze how the cotton gin made things worse for slavery. We're examine the different ways slaves tried to strike back against the owners. Because again, I've heard some students in the past who said things like, "Oh, if I was a slave, I would have done this, I would have done that. I wouldn't have been laying around like they were." I'm like, they didn't. So we're gonna look into that. And we're creating an argument on whether the Missouri Compromise was a good thing or a bad thing. Okay, so let's go ahead and get to the warm up. All right, so here is your picture. Now, the question's asking you what is this artist trying to say about North America, Europe, and Africa? Okay, now really look at Africa and um, basically like how's it look, things like that. That should really give you a clue. Okay, how Africa looks and what's going on in Europe and in America. Um, Now, like I told another student in class because he was like, "Well, does these rocks represent a certain thing?" And I told him actually it could represent several things. Okay, so there's no real one answer. Um, there's several possible really good answers. Okay, so don't try to look for that one perfect one. Just analyze it and tell me what you think. Okay, what do you think this artist is trying to say? All right, so pause the video, write your response because we're moving on in three, two, one. So, Southerners were really getting upset because their escaped slaves weren't going north, they were going south. Because you have to remember, at this time, Florida is part of Spain. It's not part of the United States. And at the beginning part, some slaves would escape south, not north. Um, and the thing is, when they went south towards like Florida, um, they were kind of protected in the sense by the Seminole Indians. Because the Seminole Indians would look at these runaway slaves and they'd look at them going like, "Hey, man, who are these guys? Where are they running from?" And then all of a sudden they would see these white, slavers, white bounty hunter people, and they recognized maybe not the people, but hey, this person's white, and our people have been attacked by these white people. We've been kicked off our land by these white people. They brought harm to us, so they attacked the white people. So inadvertently, the Seminole Indians were protecting the runaway slaves. Okay, um, and it got to the point where the Southerners were telling the president, "Hey, you need to do something." And so the president was like, "Hey, Spain, you got to do something." And Spain's like, "Dude, we got enough issues, you know." So the Secretary of War was told, "Okay, now if Spain won't do something, you got to do something." And this guy right here, you see, John C. Calhoun was like, "I gotcha, I gotcha." So he assembled a battalion of troops to go to Florida under the command of Andrew Jackson. Now, Andrew Jackson would later become our president. But the thing is, he doesn't have a good track record with Native Americans, even at this time right here. Um, so, yeah, it's not going to be nice. And on top of that, still to this day, some Native Americans don't carry $20 bills in their pocket because Andrew Jackson's on it. They'll carry ones, fives, tens, fifties, hundreds, but some Native Americans won't carry 20s because it's his picture on it. Now, like I said, Spain was going through a lot of issues. They had countries like Mexico, Colombia, Nicaragua, Peru, even like as far south as Uruguay. All these countries were basically trying to get their independence. So Spain was really stretched thin and they're trying to maintain their power. So when the United States was like, hey, we need you to do something, we need you to do something, they were like, you know what? Fine, just you guys can have it. So they basically sold Spain for nothing. I mean, the United States really didn't pay anything for it. And there was no real stipulations either to get Spain. So the United States got it. And I hate to say it, but it's true that those runaway slaves, a lot of them were recaptured. Okay. Now, going back to Spain, they're trying to hold on to those colonies, trying to hold on to that territory. But the thing is, all these little countries are fighting back. They want their independence and things like that. And a lot of monarchs and kings around the world, especially in Europe, were telling Spain, you gotta hold on. You gotta maintain. You can't let these countries go because Spain and Britain, they're like the two biggest, baddest countries in the world. And the United States beat Britain to gain their independence. And we had really no soldiers compared to Britain. And all these natives in Latin America are winning their independence from Spain. So it's kind of like if you went to prison and you're told, hey, knock out the biggest dude on the block, and you get there and all of a sudden you see that the biggest guy on the block gets knocked down by a small guy, and the second biggest guy on the block gets knocked down by another small guy. If those big guys come to you, are you going to be scared? No, right? Because hey, you've already seen them get dropped by these other two guys, and you're bigger than those guys. You can probably drop them. It's that lack of fear that is hurting them, and that's what they want to hold on to. That fear of, oh, we'll do this to you if you do. So now that the fear is starting to diminish, they're starting to lose that grip. So the Louisiana Purchase caused a rift in the slavery issue. Is it going to be free? Is it going to be slave? Is it half going to be free? Half going to be slave? Is it all going to be free? Or is it all going to be slave? This is the issue that they were dealing with. Okay. But in 1820, Maine wanted to be part of the US. Now, like some students said in class, like, weren't they part of the original 13? No, they weren't. They were not one of the original. But the thing is, they wanted to be part of uh, the US. So they said, okay, we want to be part, but we don't want to be slave. We think slavery is stupid. We don't want slavery here. So they went in as a free state. And the balance of free and slave kind of went more towards the free. And this is where the southern states really started to get upset and started to crap their pants because they're like, well, if they have the majority, then they're going to make laws to make slavery illegal or try to stop the slave trade and things like that. So they were really freaking out. Now, thing is though, they knew the territory of Missouri wanted to become a state too, and they knew these guys were slave. So what they did was Congress basically said, "We'll let Missouri decide do they want to be free or slave." This is like the stupidest thing ever because everyone and their mama knew they were a slave state, that they wanted to be slave. They were dying to be slave state. So when it came to be and they asked them, what do you want to do? They said slave. And this basically brought the thing back even. So like I said in like class, it'd be like if you ask the starving man, do you want food? You know he's gonna say yes. He's starving. you know? But I gave him an option. I asked him, but you already know the answer. So that's what happened. The very next year, 1821, Missouri becomes a slave state. So now the balance goes back to being even. And again, the question comes up, is the Louisiana Territory going to be free or slave? So this guy you see in the picture here, that is Illinois Senator Jesse B. Thomas. And he comes up with a suggestion. He says, okay, look at the 3630 parallel line. Anything above that line is free. Anything below that line is slave forever. Okay? Now, like I said in class, that line basically rips through. If you keep going all the way across, um, where I live here in California, um, that would be considered like the border, right near the border of slave territory. Now, you guys up here in Fresno, you guys would be the free area. Okay, so that's how it was. But like I said in class, though, based off what you've heard so far, does it sound like they have they're trying to solve the slavery issue, or does it sound like they're more likely trying to make everyone happy, both slave and free states? You know. So the northern cities really started to expand, with land and population. So a lot of because again they had factories, they had a lot of cities and things like that. So people were coming up north to get jobs, and people coming from other countries were coming and settling in the north because they had jobs. But now it came to the point of, well, now we have to feed them. So the need for agriculture became even more important because again, more people means more you need more food, you need more drinking water, you need more land so that the people can live, and you just need more of everything. Now in the south, there were very few cities, and they weren't all clustered together, so that no, they were pretty spread out and stuff like that. And there weren't very many factories because again, if you remember from a couple lessons in the past, um, they saw factory land as a waste of land. They would look at this classroom and be like, oh, this is just a waste of farmland. Look at how much tobacco we can grow, how much cotton, how much, peanuts and tomatoes and potatoes and all that stuff we can grow on this land. But no, because this building's here, it's taking up this land forever and we can't use it. That's how they saw land. Okay. So they really focus on cash crops. Now, why are they called cash crops? It's because places around the world really wanted these crops from the United States. It's not that they couldn't grow it where they're from, but the thing is, here it grows bigger, better, stronger because of our climate, our soil, and things like that. So things like tobacco grew so much better here than elsewhere around the world. The rice, the sugar canes grew so much bigger and stronger. But the cash crop of them all, the golden crop, was cotton. Now, Eli Whitney, he wanted to try to slow down slavery. So he invented a machine called the cotton gin. And basically it was like this. Um, Before, there would be like five slaves tearing through cotton, taking out the seeds, right? They're cleaning the cotton. This machine does the same thing. It takes the cotton, you turn the reel, and it would stretch out the cotton, and the seeds would drop, and then the fluffy cotton would come on the other end. And his thinking was this: okay, so if five slaves did this, then and this machine could do the job of all five, then the owners would be like, okay, now I don't have to have these five slaves, and I won't have to buy any more slaves, and that will slow down the slave trade, you know, so that was his hope. But in reality, that didn't happen. Okay. 2/3 of all exports was cotton. Now, if you don't know what an export is, it's when something leaves our country. So think of the word exit. When you exit a building, you leave, right? Same thing with this. Export is means something is leaving our country. And of all the stuff, again, leaving our country, 2/3 of it was cotton. And in the South, they still have this saying, cotton is king. Now, going back to Eli Whitney. So what happened was the slave owners basically said, okay, this machine doesn't work of 5 slaves. We'll put those 4 slaves, you know, back to out in the field to work and things like that. And then that one slave worked the machine. Um, then when we get all that money, from the cotton and some of that, more cotton being picked because now those people are on the field, and now this job is a lot easier and the cotton picked better, the clean better. Then we can make more money, and then I can make more land, buy more slaves, buy more of those boxes, and it's just a vicious cycle. And that's what happens. The slave trade gets out of hand. And like I said in class, a lot of people who invent things, they invent it with good intentions. They mean well in their heart and soul, but in reality, it hurts people. And that's exactly what's happening here. It's hurting the slaves. So it's because of this that the slave trade expands like crazy. Um, so think of it like this: from the 1700s up until 1820, there were 1.5 million slaves, right? So it took like 120 years to get to that point. But because of this, in just 30 years, they accomplished the same amount and actually a little bit more. They bring it up to 3.2 million slaves in the United States, particularly the South. And just to give you an idea, the total amount of slaves compared to the total population, the slaves accounted for 37% of the total population in the South. So basically, a little over 1 in 3 people were slaves. That's a lot of people. Another big misconception that I want to make clear with this too is that a lot of people think, oh, these slaves worked on big plantations and things like that. Um, Although there were a lot of people working on the big plantation, there were more working on little farms. These little farms may not have had hundreds of slaves, but they would have like, anywhere from 4 to 8, sometimes even 2, though, to like 10. It just varied on the farm and what was that slave doing? Because some slaves, were bought even though they were older. They were used as house servants, working in shops and things like that. Even some of them were used as like mail deliverers. Take this letter to so and so, things like that. You know, so it was that kind of thing. You so it wasn't always all just working in the fields or being in the house. There was also some who worked in shops and things like that. Now, here are some laws that I found uh, in the South for slaves. One of them, which is interesting as hell, was that they could not own property at all. Even technically, the clothes on their backs didn't belong to them in the eyes of the law in the South. That wasn't even their clothes, that was the master's clothes. Um, so, yeah, I mean, nothing, absolutely nothing they couldn't own. Another one was they couldn't leave their master's premise without without strict permission. So they had to ask for permission to leave if the master was near them. And like I said in class, let's say the master came to them, walked to their area, and they were about to leave. they had to ask the master, wait till he gets close and be like, you know, can I leave? I need to get something from the shed or whatever. I need to go restroom, you know, excuse me. And the master would say yes or no, even though the master came to them. Okay. This one I didn't believe until I actually read it for myself and researched it a little bit more. Um, but a slave could not testify against a white person in court. So, like I said in class, if this, you know, student killed this student, and I'm a slave and I saw it, and they're both white, that slave who killed, or that white student who killed the other white student, they didn't have to worry about killing me because they'll be like, hey, this is the witness. I got to get rid of him because I'm a slave. So they know, hey, you can't testify against me. And even if that slain student's family was like, did anyone see what happened? Yeah, well, there was a slave who saw it. I want them to testify. I want justice done. Take their statement, things like that. The authorities would be like, no, that slave's word means nothing in the eyes of the court. So it's really, really sad. And another student mentioned this yesterday, which I was like kind of surprised that they said this. They go that it still applies to this day. I was like, what do you mean? And they said, because like a person who has a record, when they're brought into court, that's the first thing the other lawyer brings up, and they try to make them sound like their word doesn't mean anything because they have a record. I'm like, yeah, yeah, very good. That is true. That's what lawyers will try to do. Knock the characters, um, the character witness, knock them down. And if they have to question the character, who they were, what they did, things like that, they'll do it. Now, above all, the number one law was that slaves were forbidden to read and write. Now, did some slaves learn how to read and write? Yes. Some of them were taught by their masters to read and write, and that was very dangerous for the master, because thing is, again, it was an unspoken rule, but it was still a rule everybody knew. You don't teach your slaves to read and write. You don't allow them to know how to read and write. Uh, and a lot of the people would get arrested, or at the very least, they'd be shunned by the town. And what I mean by shun is that shops would refuse to sell to them. People would, if they had that, people had like cotton and other things they needed to sell, they wouldn't buy it from them, and they would try to make their lives hell. And like I said in class, were there a lot of cities in the South? No, there weren't. And even if there was another city nearby, let's say there's one here and then there's one over here, and this one shunned them. If they went to this one, they're already near them and they're close. Chances are they know what they did too, so they would shun them. So life was very difficult if that happened or if it was found out. Um, One of the most famous runaway slaves is that man right there, Frederick Douglass. He became one of the leaders of the anti-slavery movement, which is called the abolitionists. Okay, these guys really didn't like slavery and did everything they could to get rid of it. Now, Frederick Douglass wrote a book called My Bondage and My Freedom. And in this book, he wrote what happened, basically, what life was like for him as a slave from the crack of dawn till he went to sleep, and all the horrible things that these slave owners did, not just to him, but people he saw, how families were basically ripped apart in two and things like that. So he wrote that down, and this his book became a bestseller in Britain and all over Europe. People were just shocked and just like amazed, like, oh my God, people are treating people like this. You know, people in the North here in America were reading this, going, see, I knew they were doing this kind of stuff. I knew they were doing this and this and that. And people in the South were like, oh, he's such a liar. He's exaggerating about that. We don't take kids away from their moms and things like that. Yeah, they did. But they're trying to convince themselves like, oh, we're not these type of monsters. We wouldn't do this and that. We wouldn't whip so and so for all this and that. Or they might be like, well, you know what? He didn't talk about what that other person did. They probably deserved it. They try to justify it. Okay. Um, Now going back to what I was saying at the very, very beginning of the video, I've had some students in the past saying, well, if I was a slave, I wouldn't be taking all this stuff. I'd be just like fighting back. I'd be doing this and that. Well, slaves did fight back. But they used different tactics. They used something called slowdown, which is exactly what it sounds like. Basically, they would slow down their role in picking fruits and things like that. Um, because if a fruit is ready to be picked and it's still out there on the vine after a week, is it going to be fresh? No, it's not. And chances are it's going to be spoiled. And like a student said in class, well, yeah, then they're going to get beat. It's like, well, yeah, they might get beat, but the thing is, too, they're so the thing is, they're gonna beat their slaves, right? If they slow down. But here's the thing: are the slaves already used to being beaten down? Absolutely, absolutely, they're used to it. So who's gonna get hurt more, the slave or um the slave owner? And it's the slave owner. They're gonna get hurt worse because it's hurting what they care about the most, which is their pocketbook. Um, The other thing slaves would do is burn down houses and barns, especially the barns containing the wheat, the barley, the fruits, the vegetables, the cotton. And they would basically tell their owner, hey, I don't know. I don't know what happened. You know, I think maybe that other plantation owner over here, maybe they burned it, your rival person, but really they did it. Okay. Um, Now, other slaves did try to run away. Okay. And before they did, they would actually use violence against their owners. Some of them tried to kill them. Some of them did. Some of them, didn't do as well. Some failed completely. Okay. But the thing is, to get rid of that idea of like, oh, they just all sat back and did nothing. No, no, they did. Okay. Now, there is no exact number of how many slaves actually escaped, but the number I see quite a bit is about 200,000. Okay. Um, Slaves escaped before Civil War, and they headed up north where they joined up with churches and other organizations. And a lot of them got jobs and basically earned a living and lived a life up until a certain point because a law is passed, which we're going to get into in the future. Now, here's my question to you. Would it be important for the slave owner? Why would it be so important for slave owners to make sure their slaves couldn't read or write? Why is that so important? Of all the laws and all the things that they're implementing, why is keeping their slaves, why is keeping them from reading and writing so important? Why do you think? Okay? So think about it. Really, really think about it. And if you don't know how to start it, there's a writing prompt on the bottom. Okay. Once you're finished, that's it with this lesson. So hopefully you learned something new. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I do apologize for the time. I didn't realize it was that long, but still important stuff. And I hope you did take it in and enjoy this lesson. Okay. So with that being said, you guys, you take care, be safe, and I'll see you guys later. Okay.